Hello, I'm Kay Lemon, Executive Director at the Marketing Science Institute. As many of you know, nonprofit MSI serves as the bridge between marketing theory and business practice. Our goal to be moving the needle on significant marketing problems. We do this by funding research by leading academics worldwide on topics voted on by our 70 corporate sponsors and disseminating that research through members-only events and a variety of publications. I'm very pleased to welcome you to another MSI For Members by Members webinar. This is a series of webinars on subjects related to MSI's current research priority topics. First, I'd like to point out the Chat with Presenter function in the left-hand corner of your screen. Please use this feature to send through any questions you have for our presenter during the presentation. We'll gather all the questions and have a brief Q&A session following the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's featured speaker. Ruth N. Bolton is Professor of Marketing at the W.P. Carey School of Business at Arizona State University. She previously served as the 2009 to 2011 Executive Director of the Marketing Science Institute. Ruth also served as the 2003 to 2005 editor of the premier journal in our field, the Journal of Marketing. She's written over 80 articles and frequently presents her work to executives and academics around the world. She's the 2016 recipient of the top award in our field, the AMA Irwin McGraw-Hill Distinguished Marketing Educator Award, and also received the 2007 Services Career Contribution Award. She's the author of Service Excellence, Creating Customer Experiences that Build Relationships, recently published by Business Expert Press. I've had the honor to work with Ruth on many research projects. She's one of the most insightful people I know. You're in for a real treat today. Welcome, Ruth.
Thanks, Kay, and thanks to everyone who's joining us today. I took a look at the list of participants, and it's really a diverse group, and I know that MSI members have a pretty sophisticated understanding of marketing issues. So my goal for today is to really just highlight 5 key ideas about the customer experience, which have come out of this book that I've recently written. But I'm really going to focus a lot more on some of the fairly recent research findings that connect to these ideas. So I'm kind of hoping at the end we can get some discussion going around these frontier issues. So one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is customer experience challenges, and probably like a lot of folks listening in today, trying to deepen my understanding of the customer experience, but also getting a little bit frustrated because when I sit back, I hear about challenges to do with things like return on engagement, managing touch points, purchase journeys over time. And yet when I hear folks talk about it, I hear a very sort of fragmented discussion of the customer experience. And I worry a little sometimes that we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. For example, I sat in a talk one time where someone kind of said, gee, forget about brand equity, forget about customer satisfaction. All that matters is social networks. And I actually think social media is really important. Social networks are really important, but I don't want to throw at everything that we already knew. So what I want to do today is present a sort of a coherent, integrated framework, a way of looking at the customer experience, and I want to take a service-centered perspective. I think researchers who have focused on service have a head start in understanding the customer experience because they start from the premise that customer experiences are co-created over time by participants in a network, where the participants are the company, its customers, other partners such as suppliers. So I want to talk about some of the implications of what a service-centered perspective mean in a couple minutes. Trying to page down here. Oh, there we go. So you'll see here I've identified some questions that I've heard managers talking about. I don't want to focus too specifically on these questions because every company and every industry is different. And if we get too granular, what we talk about won't apply in other really different situations that different managers are thinking. So I'm really going to focus on 5 key ideas that I think can help managers address some of these challenges. And what I suggest is you think of the ideas I'm presenting as kind of a checklist or a framework to help you see solutions for customers and identify opportunities for your company. But before I do so, let me just take a couple minutes to talk about what a service-centered perspective is to make sure that we're all on the same page. And so what I've done here is I've sort of shown the traditional view of the customer experience and what I would call the modern view. And of course the modern view actually is pretty old at this point, because I think we've all bought into a lot of these views about the customer experience, some as long as 10 or 15 years ago, but I just want to reiterate them to make sure we're all on the same page. So the first aspect of the traditional view is that experiences are sort of delivered through the firm's processes and are standardized to create best solutions for customers. Whereas I think a service-centered view takes a slightly different framework on this. Experiences are holistic. They're co-created by participants in a network. And these experiences have beliefs, emotions, sensory elements, all sorts of small details. But I especially want to emphasize that there's variability in these experiences, variability over time as the customer's journey unfolds, and variability across customers. So the notion of standardizing to create best solutions or outcomes isn't really going to work. What we want to talk about is transferring key solutions to different situations, which is different than standardizing. So a second aspect of the traditional view is that organizations are funneling customers towards purchase and repurchase. That's the first firm's goal. We have to monetize this. We have to make money. But a service-centered perspective starts from the understanding that customers seek to achieve specific goals, and that these goals can be at a very high level. I'm looking for fun and adventure when I go shopping, to very situation specific. I want a blue pair of slacks and I need to get them today. And they are trying to make progress towards these goals where their actions and their thoughts and their emotions are going to change over time. So the funnel is gone. Customers are active in terms of what they're trying to do to accomplish their goals. The third difference, I think, is that we traditionally have thought of organizations as creating and delivering value to customers, whereas now we think a lot more about organizations integrating participants' resources and capabilities. And customers have resources and capabilities, and the company has organizations and capabilities. And one of the things that this implies for innovation in technology and new media is that we're not just leveraging the firm's capabilities and then scaling up to deliver benefits and values. We're actually trying to anticipate and plan for customer participation and co-creation in different situations. And I think a good example, if you just sort of look at news headlines, is think about what you've been seeing about Airbnb or Uber. These are two companies that have platforms that bring together suppliers and customers. And what is Airbnb doing right now? Well, they're combating discrimination. Suppliers and customers' goals are not aligned. What is Uber doing? Well, in New York City, they've had to create a drivers association. They're working with the drivers association to share information, to align goals, and to bring together resources and capabilities of the two different groups. So I won't talk about the service-centered view anymore, but this is sort of my underlying assumption about kind of how the customer experience unfolds. Now, I want to just take 2 seconds to talk a little bit about metrics, because I think this is critical to understanding the customer experience. And I've sort of summarized this on the next slide. And you may or may not agree with how I've ordered these concentric circles. But I think if you think about how our thinking of the customer experience has evolved over time, is that initially firms were very narrowly focused on the product service offering. And then that would be back in the 80s, a lot of focus on total quality management. Then we kind of moved out and said, no, customer satisfaction matters, customer value matters, loyalty matters, brand equity matters. And then again, as time marched on another decade, all of a sudden we said, okay, engagement matters. We don't care just about purchase behavior. We care about all those non-purchase activities, reviews, ratings, C2C, B2C, C2B, social identity, that kind of thing. And then when we finally get to customer experience, that's kind of the biggest, most encompassing view of the customer. And it says, well, wait, the customer experience is holistic. It's not just all these details. It's how they're assembled. It incorporates cognitive, emotional, sensory, spiritual, social, behavioral responses, covering every aspect, every touch point over the entire customer journey. And I've pulled that out and shown a sort of an arrow with time at the bottom. And I did that in particular because I think when we think about the customer experience, there's much more of an emphasis on spatial and temporal features. So what is the point in time? What has gone before? What is coming next? Where is the customer located? At what touch point along the customer journey? So what I'm trying to move towards is really a forward-looking perspective on the customer. And I think I'm not the only one who's thinking this way. I know some other folks at MSI and I talked about it a while back and talked about, well, what would a forward-looking view of the customer experience mean? And this is something that I know Kay is interested in and many others are interested in. And our viewpoint comes from building statistical models that track customers over time and how relationships unfold over time and what leads to longer relationships, to buying more, to cross-buying. So when you think about what companies have traditionally done, they're always looking backwards. What was customer satisfaction yesterday? What do customers say right now that they want tomorrow? Except customers don't really actually usually know what they're going to want tomorrow. What are the customers saying about our brand right now? And so really the purpose of this talk is to encourage all of us to be more forward-looking in looking at the customer experience. And I want to sort of call out that there are 5 key ideas that I think are crucial to the customer experience. The first is how well the customer and organizational goals are aligned. Secondly, how well the offering fits with the customer situation. Third, the relevance of the experience to the customer. Fourth, the organization's reputation. And then fifth, the actual touch point, the moment in time, the channel, the market that the customers are in. And I want to suggest that we need to do a much, much better job of anticipating and being there when the customer needs us and not waiting for the customer to tell us, because customers aren't very good at anticipating or predicting what they want next. So I'm going to use the rest of our time together to talk about these 5 ideas, and I would suggest that they might make a useful frame for how to think about the customer experience and have some implications for how we deploy people, technology, business analytics, how we innovate and design better experiences. And quite frankly, I think we need these really strong frameworks. The world's become very complex. We've got a lot of big data. We have lots of amazing kinds of solutions that technology has brought to us, but we still have this challenge of turning insight into action. So I think using these criteria may be somewhat helpful. So let's start with the first one, which is alignment of the customer motivations and goals, alignment of the organization's goals with the customer's goals. And here I've brought you a chart. It's actually from some unpublished research, but I'm pretty excited about it, so I couldn't resist showing it to you today. I've been doing some work with a team of researchers and a global company. And the global company is pretty sophisticated. They know a lot about the customer experience and what customers are looking for. But one of the things that we were very interested in understanding was how what's important to the customer differs depending on the touch point. And here I'm showing store versus website, but there are other touch points. There's catalogs, there's customer care centers, there's social networks online. So how does what is important to customers vary across touch points and vary depending on the customer's goals and vary depending on the customer's emotions. So just to simplify it a little, I'm showing you 2 touch points, and then I'm showing you how important certain emotions are depending on the customer's goals. And I've actually collapsed the goals into 3 categories, which are buying, browsing, and other, where other includes a lot of search goals, but some other stuff as well. So the reason why this is such an important chart is that theory tells us that depending on a customer's goals and emotions, people will focus their attention towards different things. Okay, so If people are browsing, for example, browsing is a hedonic goal. It has a lot of emotion to it. They're going to be focusing on different aspects of the environment, different things that the organization are doing than if customers are buying, which is a more utilitarian goal. Well, that's what theory tells us in experiments, but this particular retailer was interested in, well, what is actually going on in practice? And what these charts show is in fact that the emotions experienced depending on what goals the customer has do make a really big difference. So if you look at the chart on the left, which shows the store as the touch point, what jumps out right away is that excitement is an emotion that has a very big effect, big positive effect. And frustration is an emotion that has a negative effect. But browsers consider excitement more important, and buyers consider frustration more important. And what we've actually found in our statistical models, and I won't go through the details, but this has ripple effects on everything that happens in the customer experience. Because if you're a browser and you're excited, you are going to start focusing on the things in that touch point, in that environment that feed into that, how attractive the environment is, how appealing the offerings are, how they're displayed. Are the skirts with the blouses, or are they as opposed to separately? It's much more exciting to see a whole outfit put together. On the other hand, if you're buying and you're looking for a pair of blue slacks, then you want things to be easy to find, and you get frustrated if they're not easy to find. And our statistical models show that these things have ripple effects, so that in fact certain things that are happening get magnified because of the goals and emotions of the customer, or diminished because the customer isn't even looking at that. They don't care about that right now. Now what's really interesting is that it actually plays out a little bit differently in the website. And again, there's a lot going on in these charts, so let me just point out one thing, and that's this weird emotion that we've labeled functional. Well, that comes from something in psychology that says that customers want to sort of have this feeling of control or dominance over what's going on around them. And it's not surprising. This turns out to be really important on a website, right? People are kind of used to being able to do things, click through quickly, find what they want. Or if they're browsing, browse through a lot of interesting ideas. And so it turns out that functionality is a really important emotion on the website. And the problem is if they don't have that feeling of control and dominance, they get frustrated. And then they start focusing on how long it's taken to click through and how long it's taken to make that online purchase. So we see a slightly different way that things are playing out depending on the goals and emotions of the customer on the website. Now the exact details, of course, are going to be really different depending on the kind of organization that you are in. But the takeaway is really clear. Customers are paying attention to very different aspects of the experience depending on their goals and on their emotions. So one thing you might want to think about doing is making a little 2x2 and asking yourself, where are you operating when you interact with customers? Are you operating in that sort of traditional top left box where you're really just focusing on quality and sort of utilitarian things and the organization's goals, which is usually to monetize and get to a purchase? Or have you moved down to where you're really trying to align your goals with what the customer wants to happen? Or are you maybe over here in the top right box where you've really focused on emotional engagement but maybe kind of ignored goal alignment? And I particularly make a call out here to business-to-business organizations, because in talking recently with some of them are acknowledging that they're really seeing customer emotions like rage when things aren't going right playing out, in account management situations, so that, emotionally engaged experiences can be important there too. And then last, maybe where we'd like to be, which is having both goal alignment and emotionally engaged experiences, so that everything is congruent and comes together in the customer experience. And I think that's why so many organizations are focusing on innovation and design to create these congruent experiences where the functional and the aesthetic reinforce each other. And if you look on the next slide, I've actually thrown out some examples. One I really like about goal alignment is American Express's Small Business Saturday, which I believe is coming up in November. This program started back in 2010 and became really viral and has been very, very successful. And the key, of course, to it is it aligns so well. It aligns the goals of shoppers, merchants, and American Express to get out, connect in the community with small businesses, shop, access unique content, local product offerings. It's win-win for everybody, and that's why it's so powerful. Then if you look over at approach number 2, emotionally engaged experiences, where it's really important to recognize what has gone before and to understand what are the important experiential attributes. Some good examples here are the Lego Company and IKEA. These are offerings where the customer experience involves a lot of creativity, a lot of playfulness. That's an area where marketers have a little trouble because there's not hard and fast rules there about that. Ideas and inspiration becomes important, and there's kind of a fine line there, because go online, look at some of those YouTube videos. Folks are doing some things with IKEA furniture that's actually they're repurposing it in ways that might actually even be dangerous. It no longer can bear the weight of whatever they're putting on the furniture or whatever. So it's kind of cool. You want to have inspiration, ideas, creativity, but you want to give guidance and support to customers so that they have a favorable experience and going forward and use these offerings in really interesting ways that offer solutions to them. Then the toughest box, of course, is goal alignment and emotionally engaged experiences. And here the example that I love to tell is about a high-tech firm. It had customer support centers in different places around the world offering proactive and reactive solutions to business customers. And what they found is that their engineering team operating out of Scandinavia was not considered to provide a good customer experience. And this was extremely puzzling to them because these were engineers of the highest caliber working intently in these focused teams, delivering remote service to different parts of the world, really the best of the best. But what was interesting is that customers didn't know any of that. Where were the visual cues? Where were there any signs that in fact the organization's goals were aligned with the customer's goals? They flew in some of their biggest customers into the support center, flew them all the way to Scandinavia, and let them see the behind-the-scenes action. And so then the customers were actually able to see that what in a remote service encounter looks like silence or a delay, gosh, the engineering team hasn't called me back and my system is down, actually was a sign that folks were working very, very intensively behind the scenes to develop the solution and implement it as quickly as possible. And those visits by business customers really completely turned around their perspective on the customer experience because they now interpreted the kind of small details of the interaction in a way that showed that, no, these engineers really are committed and really are supportive, but they're not giving me an update every 2 minutes because they're working hard on the problem. So I think this 2x2 matrix can be kind of helpful to think about, are you in the right quadrant where you need to be? And we don't have time to talk about it today, but I recently read a paper about robots and automated social presence, and I was thinking, it would be really useful to think about how you would deploy robots in some of these experiences. So that's kind of a fun thing to think about. But let's move on instead to the second important idea about the customer experience, which is fit with the customer context. And I think this is a real departure from the way we used to think about delivering quality and value to customers, because we used to think about raising the average level of the customer experience, whether it was quality or value or waiting time, improving waiting time, and decreasing the variance, increasing reliability, and making experiences more consistent. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. We don't want to wait a long time in line, for example. But the problem is, as you develop more customized and personalized experiences, by definition there's going to be more variability. In fact, the system has to be flexible and has to be resilient to accommodate variability. So this idea of minimizing variance, which was really powerful and drove the success of a lot of companies in the 80s and 90s, has to not be left behind, but we have to layer something on top of it. We have to start using our business analytics to manage experiences and think about improving fit rather than just making variance go away altogether. And the great thing is, of course, is we have the data, we have the predictive models that we can start to do that. So how do you anticipate and plan for variability? Well, we've already said we want to align goals and we want to fit to the customer's goals at a particular point in time. What do we mean by fit? It's the degree of congruency between the customer's needs and the resources and capabilities of the firm's offering. So it can include hard attributes as well as soft attributes like employee warmth. And with a team of researchers, one thing that we did is we interviewed a lot of executives to talk about this issue. And one of the big things that came up with executives in firms across all different kinds of industries was that the challenge right now is that the competitive environment is so intense that companies are delivering offerings that are very comparable on a lot of dimensions, in terms of quality levels, at least in the developed world. And in that case, small details start to manage more and start to ensure a good fit. And the small detail could be a sensory input, a discrete emotion, an employee action, or a technology-enabled action. And just because it's been in the news, I'll use the iPhone 7 because I've got an iPhone 6. And in my casual look at the business press, some people are saying, well, is the iPhone 7 really all that different? Because other smartphones have gotten a whole lot better. So whereas before we got really excited whenever a new iPhone came out, does it have that important difference in the small details that really makes it fit well with my particular needs? And at least initially the business press is kind of saying, well, the other smartphones have gotten pretty good. And then more recently I've read, well, no, but there's this really cool new benefit, this thing that the iPhone can do for you that they couldn't do before. And the key point here is that this small detail that makes that fit so good should be non-alignable, which means that it doesn't directly compare with the competitive offerings that are out there, so it favorably differentiates. A really terrific example that I love here is a company called BT. They're a global material handling company owned by Toyota, and they provide high-density warehouse storage solutions, so things like forklifts and narrow aisle trucks and that kind of equipment. And what this BT decided, or the executive management of BT decided, is that they needed a more differentiated strategy, and they decided to focus on the driver experience, the customer experience, where they're trying to create and deliver favorable sensory and emotional experiences for the driver. You think, well, but the driver isn't the buyer, okay, right? There's a purchasing committee that's doing all this stuff. Well, but if all the offerings are kind of the same, the driver experience starts to matter. So this company is offering things like the driver is able to quickly change positions, handle pallets very easily and flexibly. These forklifts and trucks have fingertip controls for fast and accurate handling. And this makes the company stand out because all the other global material handling companies are emphasizing productivity and efficiency, not how the end users feel when using these service offerings and when using these solutions. So it makes for a differential advantage in the marketplace and makes people feel very good about using this particular solution. It creates a great customer experience. Now, there are a whole lot of ways to improve fit, and we just don't have time to talk about them all today, but I've listed 5 different things that you might think about later, along with some examples of what different companies are doing. First of all, of course, a lot of companies are using data and technology to understand the customer's past and present, and in that way better anticipate the future. And this is a sort of old idea of who, what, where, when, why, and how. You could kind of stop and ask those questions like a journalist. But the key issue here is that forecasting is essential, and it's possible to do that now with some of the predictive modeling out there. A second way to improve fit is to involve customers early in the innovation process and in designing experiences. The third best practice in this area is really to think a lot about good design as encompassing integrity, completeness, wholeness, and balance. In particular, that aesthetics have to reinforce and match with functionality, just as we talked about with the driver experience with forklift trucks. The fourth thing is that once you start talking about customer experiences in this very customized, time-dependent, location-dependent way, you have to think a lot more carefully about tiered value options when you're monetizing your offerings, good, better, best kinds of things. And then fifthly, thinking about fit and fairness in terms of customers' social identity. And this can happen in a B2B situation where you're thinking about the forklift truck driver as opposed to the purchasing manager, but also it can occur in the consumer market. When you think about a Phoenix Zoo member, that they can be a parent bringing a child to the zoo, they can be a senior citizen who likes to walk in the outdoors, and so forth. But the example I really love here actually comes from an executive seminar I did. This kind of quiet guy, I do these seminars in Asia, And he sat in the back of the room, didn't say too much. But then the next time I came back to do a seminar in China, he said, "Can I sit in a second time?" And then he showed up a third time, and so we got to talking. And he worked for MSA Safety in Asia. It was a company that provides safety products that protect workers in hazardous conditions. So think offerings that protect firefighters, that kind of thing. And he took a lot of these ideas about the customer experience and formed a customer experience team. Small team, didn't have a lot of resources. So their idea was, we're going to work smarter because we don't have the resources. And they started with this notion of using data and technology to understand the customer, this who, what, where, when, why, how. And then they held some sessions with employee groups. So they didn't actually start by talking to customers. But they tried to identify bottlenecks, sources of failure in the experience, and then they clustered them. There were hundreds of them, prioritized, and came up with a top 10 list. But what's really cool is they didn't rush out and do a survey or anything. They brought in the customer at this very early stage. They had some meetings with channel partners and separately some meetings with customers from some of their major accounts, just 3-hour meetings. Brought people in around a round table and really focused on listening. And what was really cool about what happened here is that for the top 10 list, 8 of the 10 employees, network partners, and customers agreed. But the other 2 things that customers mentioned weren't even on employees or network partners list. And this was a big surprise to management. So a lot of things had to do with preparing the customer for what was going to happen next. Now there's some real high-tech solutions to that, and then there's some real low-tech solutions. So what initially the NSA safety folks did is they started working with texting, advanced notification of certain kinds of activities that would take place between them and the business customer. And they specifically focused initially because there's a lot of technology and data that I don't want to get into here, but it was easier to do it for the largest customers first. But it had incredible effects, really improved the customer experience. Feedback was overwhelmingly positive. My friend George came back yet another year and said, "Gee, I want to talk to the folks at your seminar," because I was over there in China yet again. And I learned for the first time that his team had been so successful that he had been promoted. MSA Asia Pacific's gross profits were up 20%, and at a time when their competitors' revenues were shrinking. And the moral of this story here is not the specifics of what he did, which wasn't especially sophisticated, but the way he focused on fit, the way he brought together a cross-functional team, thought about fit that was very personalized, very customized, and very time-specific. These notifications took place at a specific point in time. And I love this quote from Jeff Bezos of Amazon, that the best customer service is if the customer doesn't need to call you, doesn't need to talk to you, it just works. So moving right along, let's go to the third issue, which is relevance. And I particularly want to focus on one aspect of ensuring relevance, which is leveraging digital and social media. And when I use the word relevance, I mean it in sort of the strict dictionary definition, practical importance to the matter at hand. And I think we all know now that with both new and traditional media, they must work together to create effective customer experiences. But what are some of the ways we can be more relevant? And as I was preparing for this webinar, I couldn't help seeing in the paper some gaffes. I don't want to call out any particular companies, but examples of companies who used social media and it backfired in a really big way because they weren't using it appropriately to create relevance. And so some suggestions here of opportunities to make experiences are more relevant is, first of all, there are ways to provide strategy and tools to manage employees better so they can deliver relevant experiences, co-create relevant experiences. Secondly, exploit employee efforts, sometimes leveraging technology, etc., to hopefully improve customer-employee rapport, and that doesn't always occur. Sometimes we leverage technology in ways that actually disrupts customer-employee rapport. Some interesting ways of increasing relevance by customizing the experience, by understanding that there are different kinds of scripts that unfold, and they unfold differently for, of course, customers in different touch points with different goals. And this means that, of course, information sharing is going to be really important. And there's some really interesting examples of companies that have leveraged information sharing to improve the relevance of what they contribute to the customer experience. And then lastly, let's not forget that we are interested in revenues and profits, and a lot of this benefit of being relevant pays off downstream when you're able to develop innovative new offerings that are profitable. And a really quick example, because I could talk just all day just about this one slide, but is something that Best Western is doing that I heard about recently. Best Western Hotels and Resorts, they have hotels all over the world, and they work with owner-operators on the customer experience. And not surprisingly, they have a dashboard. It tracks different kinds of process metrics for every aspect of the hotel stay, pre-arrival, arrival, guest stay, checkout, post-checkout. But they did a really interesting thing, well, two interesting things. They added to their dashboard social media, and they gave employees, and this is an option provided to owner-operators, employees could have access to this dashboard. So the first time employees at these hotel sites could see what customers were saying about them more or less in real time, unfiltered by management. Now, not all owner-operators went for this, but imagine what this did in creating relevance in the interactions between employees and customers, so that employees could see, gosh, customers are struggling at the front door. They can't find the front door. They can't get their luggage in the front door, and I have an opportunity. It's not part of my job, but I'm walking by to help them with that. So it allowed them to see how relevant small details, small things could mean so much to the customer experience. And this was done in a very simple way by just expanding their notion of what could be done with dashboards. Now I've got some other wonderful examples of what companies are doing, but I'm just going to keep moving along in the interest of time. And if there's time in the Q&A, we could come back to some of them. I'm not going to talk about these next two slides, but I'm going to throw them out because I know some of you probably would like to drill down on social media, especially with regards to relevance. I'd like to draw your attention to a paper on the topic of social media and Gen Y, or the millennials. And this particular slide just shows a framework which we actually fill in the paper. But the point I want to make here is that a lot of the times the fumbles that we're seeing with social media and new media are because of a lack of relevance, and it's because there isn't a granular enough understanding of what's going on in social media. For some reason this paper has been very, very popular. Our publisher loves it. It's getting downloaded all the time, and I assume people are paying money for those downloads, which is really terrific for the publisher. But if you have a chance, you might want to take a look at it, and you'll see that one of the things that matters in creating relevance is that environmental factors, individual factors, timing factors, and various things really matter in terms of what you do with social media, especially with millennials. So you may find that useful, and particularly useful for those of you who are trying to understand ways to be relevant to brand and user communities under different conditions. But rather than go into the details, I'm going to go on to our fourth key idea, which is organizational reputation. And I'm being very careful here to not use the word brand equity, but talk about organizational reputation, because brands are co-created. And so to a certain extent, reputation is now co-created, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about. So we all know there's all these non-purchase behaviors out there, reviews and ratings, and C2C and B2C and C2B communications, and different kinds of social identities that customers have. And so the challenge is, then what does it mean to build a reputation that goes beyond the traditional brand building that we've thought about? And I would argue that one thing we really need to think about is increasing customer participation and trust levels. There's some work that shows that customers need to understand their roles in customer-company interactions, that we need to find ways to reduce perceptions of risk and help customers see how they contribute to and can control and customize certain aspects of the interaction. We need to do a lot more to use physical design and design of our processes to reinforce how we want these experiences to unfold over time. And then we've seen earlier the importance of emotion, so using emotional and social rewards, building that into customer experiences. At the left, I've got a little example of clarifying customer roles, and you can see it's a lady helping a child build a bear in a store. But I'd rather actually use a really terrific example, which is Lowe's. You may know they have a program right now called Love Where You Live, and I think it's doing a great job of building relevance and reputation. They're a home improvement store, of course. They display products. You've probably been in there with those big, gigantic aisles and more options than you could possibly imagine, especially if you're, say, looking for a light bulb. But what's very cool is that they've moved towards displaying more products in usage situations similar to how they'd be used in customers' homes. For example, outdoor patio displays with cookout equipment. And their goal is to align with the customer's goal and let the customer interact with the products and experience them prior to purchase, so that they can experience the offering as they would experience it in their home. And that's not the only thing they're doing. They're also doing some very high-tech things. They're experimenting with holo rooms, retail service robots, in-store 3D scanning. But the idea is to prepare for the day when technology allows them to infuse more of the real customer experience into how the customer has encounters with its product and service offerings. Now, Lowe's doesn't just interact with consumers. It also interacts with business customers, and they do some real cool stuff in that space as well, where they interact with suppliers who go out to communities and help, say, helping build homes for the homeless and that kind of thing. So they're doing a lot to build their reputation in a very, very bottom-up kind of way. So they're building their reputation, creating relevance around the experiences that customers have over time. And it also is signaling to customers, and I keep using this word time in all my examples. It's signaling to customers that they can trust Lowe's to provide relevant experiences and to be there for them in the future. Because the brand is about a promise, but if you're not acting that promise out with customers in every touch point, then you're not successfully building reputation. And that brings us to our fifth and last point, which is thinking about the environment, because everything nowadays has to be very location and time specific. And there are so many channels out there, so many touch points. You can probably think of 17 or 18 in your own company. And a lot of times, I think organizations and managers are attracted to the idea of touch points as new sources of revenue or as ways to handle different functions in new ways for customers, or ways to substitute or complement aspects of the customer experience. But I would suggest flip it around. Again, go back to the customer's goals, the customer's fit, what's relevant to the customer, and then start thinking about the touch point and the environment, because you're going to have to create experiences, co-create experiences with the customers very differently depending on the touch point in the market. And the example I want to show here is working with a global retailer that knew a lot about drivers of the customer. They knew, for example, that they're retailers, so of course finding things in the store mattered, providing information, providing ideas and inspiration, providing products. All those things are important, so they knew that already. They'd done a lot of interesting and they're really sort of leading edge research. But they really needed to understand how touch points could offer opportunities to be very situation specific, especially time and location specific. So the company knew these experiential attributes were important to customers everywhere, and not just these ones. They're actually a big, huge, long list. Emotions, a whole bunch of other things. But what the company had never actually done is put together all of their data. They were kind of siloed. They had their marketing data, their operational data, and their financial data in separate silos. They didn't really bring it all together. So what our research team did was, in a pilot study, bring together these different kinds of attributes and ask the question, are the same things important in different situations, in different touch points, in different markets? And this company, I should have said, operated in 46 countries. And they operated multiple touch points. So we're literally talking about hundreds and hundreds of different situations. And that's not even counting, of course, that customers have different features. So what we did is we looked for statistically significant differences in what customers think is important. And it turned out that all the factors that you're looking at this slide, and I'm not even going to try to list them, all of them were statistically significant in explaining why something could be much more important, something like ease of finding could be much more important in one market or in one touch point than it is in another touch point. So one of the things that we discovered is that in general it seems as if, and again I don't like to generalize too far because you're all in different industries and different kinds of companies, but for this company at least, it looked like there was going to be more payoff from improving the touch points than in traditional kinds of brand building. Our research team flew to company headquarters and talked with the company about some of these results, which were, it was the first time ever executives had ever looked at data in this way, because this is comparisons across hundreds and hundreds of different situations that they face in different markets. But we basically asked 4 questions. Are there market differences, situations where the company needs to adapt to the market? Now, companies already know, for example, there's big differences between developing versus developed markets, that competition can be much stronger in the developed markets. But we uncovered some really interesting findings. For example, I'll just pull out one here, something called the Country Uncertainty Avoidance Index. So take 2 countries like Denmark and the Netherlands. It turns out from a cultural perspective, they're really very, very different. People in Denmark are very adventurous. They're willing to take risks. Think Vikings. People in the Netherlands, not so much. So that means they actually have different approaches to risk, different trust levels, which play out really different in terms of shopping online versus shopping in store. And that's something that we could show systematically, that uncertainty, how customers felt about uncertainty avoidance, cut across all 46 countries. It was a systematic finding, and it was something that management had never thought about before. So that means that there's no one-size-fits-all solution in terms of touch points in different marketplaces. And that's just one example of many different market factors that we uncovered that are influencing what's important in different touch points. The second set of factors is brand factors. And there we were looking for, well, are there situations where the company has a competitive advantage or where the company needs to be doing more? And interestingly there, we found that in some markets, brand equity was buffering the company, so that where their touch points were not as good as we might hope they would be, and the company knew that. They weren't infusing new technology rapidly enough. The brand equity was buffering them somewhat. But there were situations where they didn't have a strong brand equity in some markets, and it was really hurting them that they hadn't improved their other touch points fast enough. And as I said, they had like 7 or 10 different touch points, so there was a lot going on there where they could have been doing more to better align goals, be relevant, provide better fit. And they had a brand promise out there that said they were going to do that, and they needed to start doing a better job of it. And of course, we can sort of all ask this question, of course, because this is like a top company, and so if they're not doing it all, probably none of us are. The third set of factors that indicated that different things matter in the customer experience at different points in time are things to do with the channels. And it turns out that channels are a lot more different than you might think. They can be different in different markets. They are different just in terms of their physical characteristics. And so it's really necessary to think about what factors in the channel can the company control, and can the company use to react or shape what's going on. And one of the reasons why this is important, which hasn't come up yet, is the environment or the touch point triggers goals and emotions. So this actually is an opportunity for organizations. Organizations can trigger goals and emotions that the customer is not invoking independently, and sort of turn some situations around and improve experiences in some really interesting ways. So this is a two-way street, this goals and emotions thing. So there's some very interesting opportunities around channels and other touch points. And then lastly, of course, there were a lot of differences to do with different segmentation variables and opportunities to customize experiences for different groups. And one thing that the company needed to really follow up on more, that I think probably all companies need to do more, is, of course, is people aren't always in the same channel. On one day they're in one channel and in one market segment, and in another day they're in another channel and in another market segment. Things unfold over time, and so there's no such thing as sort of a segment that stays the same. Segments are changing rapidly. People are moving through being different segments. So that kind of brings me to the end. Those are the 5 things that I think we need to think about in the customer experience. Aligning organizational goals with customer goals. Fit, improving fit with the customer context. Increasing relevance to the customer. Building our reputation in new ways by how we behave, not just with our brand promise. And then 5th, much, much more attention to the environment, to the touch point, to the point in time, and to the marketplace. The slides have listed a lot of different companies who are doing some interesting things. I know I haven't had time to talk about them all, but maybe some of you will have some ideas to share. And that's it.
Ruth, that was great. I learned a lot, and I really like the organization of the 5 things. I think it allows companies to kind of take your insights and actually come up with some specific actions that they could go further with. We have time for a couple questions. So I want to start with one that was pretty specific and related to the culture stuff that you were just talking about. The question comes up, in your experience, can culture be measured with the help of some individual level data, or is it typically considered or measured at some aggregate level?
Well, you see it done both ways. I mean, traditionally there was something called the Hofstede Index, and that's what everybody used, and it was really, really aggregate. But now what you see people using a lot more is individual level culture measures. And I think that those are the best if you can do that, if you can possibly do that. And in B2B situations, the organizational culture of the customer company can really matter, for example. But it's really kind of what kind of data can you get your hands on and integrate with what you have. So for the example that I'm showing you right now, their culture measures were probably not as fine-grained as what a lot of academics would like to see, but they did their purpose for this study. So it's really going to depend on your data and the extent to which you can integrate things, given the kinds of legacy data systems that people have out there. But if you can ask cultural questions, especially in B2B, I would do it.
Great. And then one other question, I'll read it the way that that the participant asked it, and then I'll augment it a little bit. The question was, where's the customer service aspect, with customer in quotes? How can companies foster that either in person or with technology? And that came in very early in the presentation, so I guess I would kind of augment it and say, how do you view what has been traditionally viewed as customer service, and how it fits in your framework and 5 things?
Well, I think there's sort of the small C customer service and then the big C customer service. And what I think that I see happening is that those 2 have to come together a lot more, because you've got folks on the front line delivering service, but they need a lot more support and technology, but they need it in very specific ways. But what I kind of see happening, and I think there's some research to back this up, is we are throwing so much data and technology at people. If you checked into a hotel recently, you're lucky if they ever make eye contact with you. And the reason is that you've been segmented. They've got all sorts of data about you in the system, all sorts of different process measures going on. And so the poor employees, they're grappling with all of this and might have a chance to look up at you and greet you or whatever. Recently, I ended up spending an hour in the coffee room next to the hotel lobby. My room was actually ready, but the person got so overwhelmed, they literally forgot I was out there. And so, yeah. So this is what I mean, where I think companies with good intentions, they have all this great technology and data, but making it relevant and actionable in this co-created experience, because that employee had the chance to make a big difference. And I'm sitting in Starbucks. Literally, I bought my own coffee. I didn't even get offered a cup of coffee. And this was, a brand name that everyone here would know really, really well, thinking after an hour, I think that guy's forgotten me. He's not going to text me to come back. I'm going to have to go back and ask him if my room's ready. And he literally has. The room was ready. Yeah.
So that distinction between the small C and the big C customer service, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So one more quick question, and I don't know if there's a quick answer. Many of our member companies produce, even though they try to create individual level customer experiences, they actually produce somewhat standardized goods. right? And I wonder if, as you look across the 5 key points you've made, do you see 1 or 2 that you think are more easily accessible for, say, CPG or consumables or pharma, where they may not actually be able to identify the end consumer?
Yeah, and I think you do see packaged goods folks, for example, doing some really interesting things where, if say your craft, and I'm just picking them out of the air, so it's not that I have some inside knowledge of them. But, in terms of the customer experience, if you're a student who's now going to start making quickie things in your dorm room versus a mom who wants, nutritional meals for a baby, those are really different customer experiences, really different needs for how you might interact with the customer, support the customer. So I actually think there is a lot augmented around those standardized products. And sometimes that probably means going to tiered offerings so you can monetize some of that.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And then you can take that into each of your 5 points then.
Yes. Yes.
Really. Yeah.
And there's a lot more about that in the book, but I could only talk about so much. Sorry.
No, this was great. Thank you so much, Ruth. We got some great comments, even people sending you notes about what a fantastic webinar this was. So we're running out of time, and if Ruth didn't get to your questions, or if there are additional things you would like to discuss with her, we invite you to reach out to her at ruth.bolton@asu.edu. Our next event will be Marketing in the Consumer Internet of Things on September 30th at George Washington University. The Internet of Things will impact marketing so much sooner than many think, and it already is. And this event explores the possibilities and the challenges it presents. Today is the last day to register, so be sure to sign up today or email us at meetings@msi.org if you have any questions about the event. Many thanks again to Ruth and to members of the MSI audience for participating in this member-to-member webinar series.